all of these philosophical ideas were transmitted through a Guru Shishya Parampara. So the teacher used to teach the student, this is what we call the Guru Shishya Parampara. But there were certain texts also, it's not that they were simply talking and they were listening. There are certain texts which they took the help of, but they were only that, they were just help. The main philosophical discussion or philosophical learning happened through the oral dialogue. So there were certain foundational texts like the Sutra texts, then there were commentaries like which were called bhashyas, and then there were explanatory texts like the Vartikas. There were even textbooks for various darshanas. So in this way, primarily through the Guru Shishya Parampara, with the help of certain texts, the philosophical ideas developed in the Indian context. Now let us see what are some of the unique features of Indian philosophy or the philosophical traditions of India. One important distinction that it has when as against the other traditions is that philosophy in India is closely intertwined with religious ideas or religious thought. So many of the philosophical ideas you will find in so-called religious books. So if you consider Ramayana to be a religious work, if you consider Mahabharata to be a religious work, you will find a lot of philosophical ideas emerging in them. For many of us, Bhagavad Gita is a religious work, but a lot of philosophical ideas are embedded in that so-called religious work also. The reason is that at that time in pre-modern India, as for that matter in several parts of the world in pre-modern era, they didn't make this distinction between philosophy and religion. So for them, knowledge was knowledge, that's all. So they found philosophical ideas even in religious texts. So, and they had a very dialectic relation, give and take relation, the philosophy and the religion. So the philosophy provided the theoretical basis or the basis or the broad basis for addressing existential issues of in the individuals. So the existential issues means the question of happiness. So they were told that in order to answer this question of happiness, you need to have certain basic philosophical understanding. So that was provided by the philosophical systems. On the other hand, the religious ideas provided the operating principles for the mundane life. So according to certain traditions, without following certain religious practices, it is impossible for you to reach the destination of ultimate bliss or happiness. So the religion provided the discipline that is required for one to go to the part or go to the stage where one can receive that ultimate knowledge about happiness. So this was the give and take relationship between philosophy as well as religion. But though there were several traditions in the Indian context, they shared certain common features. What were some of these common features? All of them believed in something called as karma. So all of us are very familiar with this term called karma. It is the fruit of your action that you have, it is somewhere accumulated by some Puranic entity. They make a note of all the good things and the bad things, etc. Like that, there is a popular belief. But the general understanding is that in some way the actions have consequences and we have to bear the consequences either in this life or the next life. So the notion of karma was shared by almost all the darshanas. They all believed that it is because of this karma that we fall into this cycle of birth and death. So transmigration, as the term some of you may be familiar with. So this transmigration happens based upon our karma. If you have karma left, you have to be born again in order to exhaust that karma. If you accumulate more karma, you have to exhaust that further, and for that you have to take further life. So they all believed in a cycle of birth and death called samsara chakra. But then there is a misconception that because of this karma everything is determined, I don't have to do anything in my life, whatever is there it's already predetermined, what can I do? This is not the case. All of them understood that there is some free will also. Though some of the things are determined by our past karma, it is up to us now in order to determine what we do. So they all believed in the concept of free will also. And with this free will, they recommended that we use in such way to attain ultimate happiness or final liberation. Liberation from what? The cycle of birth and death. So we use our free will in such a way, or to gain that kind of knowledge and to do that kind of karma or action, so that we get to a place where we are free from this cycle of birth and death. So these are some of the common parameters or common features that all the darshanas shared. All the darshanas were clear that the ultimate goal of human life or the ultimate goal of this philosophical inquiry is moksha, and they clearly spelled out what moksha is and what is the way or what is the path in which one should go in order to get this moksha. And in order to get this moksha, they had a very well defined ontology and epistemology. Ontology means it is a classification of the external world, an account of being or what is it that exists outside. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. So they developed very rigorously the concepts that are required in order to get this thing called moksha. For example, they tried to understand very clearly what this thing called jnana is or cognition is. What is this thing called knowledge? What is the difference between cognition and knowledge? What are the various ways of getting knowledge? What is the nature of Ishvara? What is the definition of Ishvara? Each of the traditions tried to develop in a very clear way, in a very rigorous way, what are the various defining features or what is the nature of each of these entities. But though each of them developed their own ideas of all of these things, they understood that we need to discuss or we need to have certain set standards of discussion. So though there were a lot of disagreements between various schools of Indian philosophy, they understood that in order to reconcile, we need to have certain ways in which we can reconcile our differences. So there was a healthy culture of debating. So it was not a kind of demeaning or dismissive dialogue that happened between the various traditions. Each of them learnt from one another. Of course, they were very critical of the other person's opinion and they were also critical of their own opinion. And there was a healthy tradition of followers also who took up the same ethic of debating between the various schools. So these are some of the unique features of Indian philosophy. So as I said, each of the various traditions tried to develop their own concepts of Jiva, Jagat, Ishvara, Jnana, etc. Each of them had a different focus area, because of which there are several philosophical traditions in India. We don't have time to cover all of them, but in this particular session, we will be covering the most famous or the most popular philosophical traditions. They are broadly classified into two labels, let us say, under two labels. One is the Vedic and the other is the non-Vedic. Now, the popular words that you will find if you pick up any introductory book on Indian philosophy is that you will find the words Astika and Nastika for these things. There is a popular connotation of what Nastika means. An Astika is someone who does not believe in God. But in this case, it does not mean like that. It means that someone who does not accept the testimony of the Veda in certain aspects to some extent or the other. So the Astikas are those who accept the testimony of the Veda, or those who believe that what the Veda tells is true. There are others who do not believe whatever the Veda says is true. So those who don't believe are called Nastika, and those who believe the authority of the Veda are called the Astika. So among the Astikas, there are 6 schools which are very popular: the Sankhya Yoga, the Nyaya Vaisheshika, and the Mimamsa and the Vedanta traditions. And among the Nastika, 3 schools are very popularly discussed. One is the Charvaka, the other is Jaina, and the other one is Bauddha. Please note that, as I said earlier, this has nothing to do with their affiliation with God, whether they believe in God or not. For example, the Mimamsa, which falls under the Vedic schools, does not believe in Ishvara or God. On the other hand, the Jaina or the Bauddha, which fall under the Nastika category, have their own conception of God. They have their own conception of heaven, hell, etc. So it's not the case that these people don't believe in God, these people believe in God. So we have to bracket out, or we have to keep out the popular connotations of these words Astika and Nastika. So these are the various schools briefly that were there in the Indian philosophical traditions, which we will be discussing in the next parts. So in the next part, we will be taking up the discussion of the Vedic schools, starting with Sankhya and Yoga.